Welcome to First-Plymouth. If I haven't met you, my name is Jim, one of the ministers here. Welcome to a night of wonder-filled appreciation for the majesty of the St. John's Bible. I suspect that a project this monumental must have began in awe. Awe at life itself, awe at the possibilities. So welcome to a night of wonder and awe. At First-Plymouth, we so value the life of the mind. We value culture and arts, and we value spirit. This will have all of that. Welcome. Let's begin. the world needs more beauty. And so I am thankful tonight to gather around the beauty of the St. John's Bible. And it's especially joyful for me to introduce our speaker this evening. The Reverend Dr. John Ross was a leading pastor in our own denomination and a close friend of mine. He pastored the Wayzata Community Church for many years. He has preached and taught here at First-Plymouth in years past. But then he had a new calling to help bring the St. John's Bible to the world, to spread its message. It is my honor and always my great pleasure to introduce to you Reverend Dr. John Ross.
I heard and I forgot. I saw and I remembered, but I experienced and I understood. I first heard these words about 30 years ago. I was at the top of Mount Marcy, which is the tallest peak in upstate New York in the Adirondack Mountains, which isn't saying much, but it was a pretty impressive day after all. I had just hiked to the top of this mountain with about 15 teenagers as part of a trip that we were on up there in the mountains. And when we achieved our goal up there at the top of Mount Marcy, our Sherpas sat us down in a circle and handed each and every one of us a little slip of paper with those very words on it. I heard and I forgot. I saw and I remembered, but I experienced and I understood. I've never looked at a mountain the same ever since. We'll get back to that in a bit. As we begin, I want to just thank a couple of people very briefly because you have an amazing team here, Jim. I want to thank Addie. I want to thank Juan Carlos, the other clergy members that have made such a warm welcome, Tom and Ariel and the choir. How awesome to have all of you here. What a great backdrop. Thank you for all that. I want to thank, we have two docents here, both from Creighton University originally or recently, Dave Crawford and Hannah Clark. Thank you for being here tonight also. They're going to be really important because after the presentation in here, we'll have an opportunity in the chapel where all of you can get up close and personal to the 3 volumes that we have on site here tonight, and they're going to help me make sure that we can cover those well for you. And I want to say thanks to First-Plymouth. What a great church. And you have to be careful about how you phrase those things, right? Because it's not about being great. It's about being faithful. And this church is a very faithful church. And it proves time and time again that a church like this can be doing more than one thing at a time. Helping people with medical debt. And the next day, helping a family grieve the loss of a child. The next day, having inspired worship. The next day, music that lifts the soul all by itself. And on and on and on. What a great place. Now, I can't start officially without taking a shot at my friend Jim Keck. I've spent my whole life, apparently, trying to avoid this guy. We went to the same camp as children. We grew up in the same church in Columbus, Ohio. We went to the same college, and never once along the way had we met each other. Now, it might be because he's significantly older. But it wasn't until we both found ourselves as senior ministers of larger churches that our paths crossed, and they have wound tighter and tighter by the day and the month and the year. This afternoon, I took the chance to give Jim a small gift. I gave him a small giclée print of one of the illuminations from the St. John's Bible that portrays 2 people sitting side by side, one with their arm over the shoulder of the other. And from the back side of these 2 people, you don't know exactly who they are, but it's a beautiful depiction of friendship. And he was impressed until I told him that it was Ruth and Naomi in the picture. So it didn't really fit for us. But it is great to be here. Now, let me start by asking you a question. When you want to celebrate something that happens only once every 1,000 years, what do? This was the question posed by Donald Jackson to the monks at St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota in 1995. What will you do to mark an occasion that only comes around once every 1,000 years, like the new millennium? Well, 16 years later, 1,150 pages of calligraphy script, 160 major illuminations at a cost of several $1 million. After all that, you have your answer. Their answer to the question, what do you do to celebrate every 1,000 years? The St. John's Bible. The first handwritten, hand-illuminated, monumental Bible in over 500 years. With remarkable courage, faith, creativity, and resolve, the monks of St. John's Abbey reached back into their own tradition and into history in order to look forward and to give a gift that was literally designed, created, and built to last for another 1,000 years. So the story of the St. John's Bible really then begins at St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota, where doing bold things was nothing new. Keep in mind, the rule of St. Benedict and his adherents have been around for 1,500 years. They've been doing big things all the way along. St. John's Abbey, named after John the Baptist, these monks came to northern Minnesota about the same time that this church was initially established in the 1850s. Quickly, they became, as they're called to, they became self-sufficient. Why? So they could turn their attention to the needs of the community around them. What did the community in northern Minnesota need more than anything else at the time? Education. And so in 1857, they established St. John's University, one of the oldest in all of Minnesota. Now, over the next century, the monks would establish a bakery that still to this day serves in the whole of the upper Midwest Johnny bread. Anybody have Johnny bread? Oh, yeah, there's a couple hands. Thank you. They established a world-class woodworking shop, recently partnering with the Posse Organ Company to establish an organ building studio there in the Abbey. Every 2 years, including right now at this very moment, the largest wood-burning kiln in North America that gets lit only once every 2 years, and it's burning right now to fire up to 20,000 pieces of pottery that has come out of the pottery studio of the St. John's Abbey. Minnesota Public Radio was born on the 3rd floor of Wimmer Hall. And in the 1950s, keep in mind, this is pre-Vatican II. In the 1950s, the monks at St. John's Abbey hired Marcel Breuer to design for them their new Abbey church, which would have running for about 50 years the largest stained glass window in North America. But much more significantly, it was designed with the altar table pulled away from the wall, with the priest standing behind it facing the people. Now, that may seem like no big deal to us, especially in the Protestant space, right? Ministers, just ask Jim, ministers can do whatever they want. I've always been able to do so. We got to pay the price from time to time for our mistakes. But in the Catholic tradition, up until Vatican II, not only did the priests face the other way, away from the people, and do it in Latin, they couldn't engage people with the Eucharist the way that this abbey, this new abbey was built pre-Vatican II. with things that still to this day are quite controversial in Catholic circles. My point is simply this. When you're asked what should you do to celebrate the new millennium, and if you're aware of the monks at St. John's Abbey, you would not be surprised to hear their answer that they're doing something big, something that hasn't been done in 500 years. And they're not just going to hire the local calligrapher. They commissioned Donald Jackson, personal scribe to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and the calligrapher in the House of Lords, a resident of Wales, which geographically created this challenge that they fought every step of the way. And the vision was simply this: to ignite the spiritual imagination of people around the world of all faith journeys. To ignite the spiritual imagination of people around the world of all faith traditions. I'm going to do two things tonight at the same time. And I want to sort of mix them together like shuffling a deck of cards a little bit. I want to make sure to introduce you to some of the particulars of the history and the creative process behind the original manuscript. But I also want to talk about why it matters. We do a lot of things without thinking about why does it matter, and it might have mattered a while ago, but why does it matter now? So if this was a sermon, you can take the preacher out of the pulpit, but you can't take the preacher out of the guy. So I got 3 points coming at you. If I had to title this message, I'd call it "For Such a Time as This." The ways in which the St. John's Bible is particularly relevant to us right here and right now. And I want to do it through 3 experiences of it. Remember, I heard and I forgot, I saw and I remembered, I experienced and I understood. The very nature of this piece of art leads us to new understandings because it always gives us a new experience of Scripture. Every time. So the 3 experiences I want to lift up just briefly is 1, life in community, 2, the experience of margin, and 3, experience of grace. So first, this idea of life in community. This project was born in the belief that all were made in God's image. I mean, that's scriptural, and it's a conviction. It's part of the rule of St. Benedict and the tradition of the Benedictines. And this was truly a grand collaboration right from the start. No one person or one institution or one organization could have pulled this off by themselves. It was the St. John's Abbey, but also St. John's University. It was also the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, which is housed on the campus of St. John's University. It was also the Liturgical Press. It was also the School of Theology. All these people came together in life together, in community together, to make this thing happen. And yeah, it all began over a lunch in Chicago after a medieval arts conference when Donald Jackson posed the question to Father Eric Hollis, "What are you guys going to do to mark the new millennium?" But from that lunch between 2 people became this grand collaboration, which in and of itself is a wonderful message to the world of what we can do together that we can never do apart. There's a beautiful illumination, and this will be a reason for you to stop by the chapel afterwards. There's a beautiful illumination in the Gospel and Acts volume. Keep in mind the St. John's Bible is divided into 7 volumes. It would be too big of a book. You wouldn't be able to pick it up. It would just fall apart. The binding wouldn't even hold if you did it all in one binding. So 7 volumes. Gospel and Acts is one of those. In the book of Acts, there's an illumination called Life in Community. The artist was Aidan Hart, and it's a picture that when you first look at it, you think, oh, that's the Last Supper. That's the Lord. There's Jesus at the head of the table. There are the disciples around, but it's not at all. When you look closely, you see, that's Mary at the head of that table. Okay, that kind of makes sense. This is coming out of a Catholic tradition. But then you see 6 apostles depicted on either side of Mary. And then, more interestingly, you see depicted members of multiple other religious communities, all sitting at the same table together. Interestingly, this depicts also a little chapel from the campus of St. John's and the great big bell banner from St. John's University, just to help place the art. That would have been part of a medieval tradition. An artist commissioned would honor the commissioner by placing them in the photo somewhere. This idea of life in community was nothing new to them, and it exists throughout the whole of the Bible. Well, that collaboration, that life in community continued because somebody needed to decide which passages are they going to illuminate. Who's going to decide what the theological underpinnings of each piece of art will be? So they formed a committee, another life in community. Sometimes we think a committee is like, oh my gosh, don't make me serve on another committee. But boy, this would have been a fun one to be on. You get the whole Bible, pick whatever verses. You get 160 to pick to create these beautiful pieces of art, fully illuminated. And so they met for the better part of 15 years throughout the whole process. Academics alongside theologians, pastors and priests, to pick those texts and then to give the artist something to start with from a theological viewpoint. Now, this Bible was going to be different right out of the gate. It had to be different. Again, you heard all the examples of the big things that these Benedictines do. The first thing it would be is that it would be big, right? Reach for a Bible in the pews. Do you have pew Bibles? You don't? Okay, grab a pew hymnal and pretend it's a Bible. Just hold that thing in front of you like this. Who's this for? It's for the individual. It's for one person. In fact, most of us, if we've grown up in a churchy kind of home or whatever, probably have our own little personal Bible. It's very personal, and it's sized appropriately. This thing, this is huge. I mean, it's hard for one person to even carry this. And you can gather 6, 8, 10 people around it all at once. It is by its very scope and size a communal experience. An important lesson that comes right out of the convictions of the Benedictines and their sense of hospitality and life in community. Another important fact, anybody know which translation of the Bible the St. John's Bible is? I mean, how many translations of the Bible are there, Jim? What do you think? Thousands, right? I mean, a lot. That's a very technical answer. A lot. Keep in mind, this is late 1990s. It's a Catholic community, Benedictine monks. You'd expect a very strictly Catholic translation. Not the brothers up at St. John's Abbey. They chose the most inclusive translation with the best known scholarship and the best lyrical flavor to it that was available at the time. This is the NRSV translation of the Bible, the New Revised Standard Version. And if you went to 10 churches in town here, you'd probably find 9 out of the 10 have that same translation, the New Revised Standard Version, right there from your bench. That was a huge, huge decision. And I would guess it cost them a lot of money, a lot of the fundraising money, to have not gone with a strictly Catholic Bible. This was intended for the world, because life in community means with the whole world. So in addition to that committee on illumination and text, how's that for a mouthful? The CIT, the Committee on Illumination and Text. Donald Jackson then had to go and hire 6 other scribes who had to learn his specific script. Don't call it a font. He'll hit you between the eyeballs with his quill if you call it a font in his presence. Donald had to hire 6 other calligraphers, teach them a brand new script that he designed specifically for the St. John's Bible so that they could work simultaneously, and it still took them 16 years. Full-time, 7 scribes in community, in the scriptorium, for 16 years together in Wales, no less. And then there were 6 artists from around the world. The artists came from far and wide, by the way. And they also did their work remotely, away from Wales, but began to do the work in community when they came together in Wales to begin the work. Again, all working simultaneously as they began the creative process. Excuse me. Life in community is more than just being able to live together. It's about being able to do things that matter in the world together. And with a vision like igniting the spiritual imagination of people around the world, of all faith journeys, meant that this was going to be a project of great collaboration from day one. So life in community is one experience that we gain through this masterpiece. The second is an experience of margin on a page. An author named Richard Swenson wrote just a few years ago, he wrote, "We are a nation on the move and in a hurry. We are a people of the forward stampede. We eat fast food during rush hour. We ship by FedEx. We place calls through Sprint. We balance our books on Quicken, and we diet with Slim Fast. We are hyper-living like field mice on amphetamines at harvest time. And the escalating pace of life is both scientifically verifiable and a permanent feature of the modern age." In a world that is spinning faster and faster, with less and less margin between our load and our limit, we need ways to slow down, to create space, because everything is working against us. Technology, mobility, mental health and anxiety. Everywhere we turn, there's something that's telling us we're not doing enough or we're not doing it right. Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, knew about this project. He said, "We tend to read greedily and hastily, as we do so many other things. This beautiful text shows us a better way. This project not only revives the ancient tradition of the church sponsoring creative arts, it also offers an insight into the lost skill of patient and prayerful reading." What I think the monks knew we needed were some ancient techniques for anxious times. To treat our anxious times with ancient techniques like those that you'll see printed on the cover of the takeaway you were handed as you came in today. Why don't you take that out for just a second? Look at the front side of this. I hope we had enough. We didn't know if there'd be 20 of you or 200 of you. It didn't matter. This was going to be a great night no matter what, and we're so glad you're here. But on the front side of this is a representation from the top left corner going clockwise of the ancient techniques that they used in this process. In the top left corner, you see depicted there the vellum that they used. Calfskin is what they used for the original manuscript. They needed over 300 sheets to make 1,150 pages. Large, strong, high quality, no scars. They searched the world for the best source, and it turned out to be right there in Wales, right around the corner. It's beautiful, it's very forgiving. But they also knew that they had to track these things so carefully, because by the time it would be bound, and the original manuscript is not bound yet, by the time it would be bound, they always had to make sure that they were alternating from the hair side and the smooth side. Because over time, they create their own sort of eco-culture and will literally grow into one another. It's a fascinating process. Ancient, medieval, right? Quills, the next picture there, or in that same picture. Quills is an art form in and of itself. If you're a lefty, you need a feather from the right side of a bird. Can't make this up. Once you find the right feather, you got to bake it in hot sand, and you want it to be the consistency about your fingernail, because they'll use a penknife, that's what that is, to sharpen that thing several times an hour. And they'll go through 6 or 8 quills a day, and over the course of about 8 hours, a scribe would do 1 page, if he or she was lucky and focused. The ink was a rare Chinese black ink that was made in the 1870s. Donald Jackson came upon a case of this ink once in London at going out of business sale. And he knew that it was rare and valuable, and he had, since he was a teenager, had this dream of handwriting the whole Bible. This is a one-of-a-kind human being. He bought up all that ink, and he kept it for years and years and years until this project came along. And I don't know how many sticks they went through, dozens and dozens, but in the end they had 1 stick of this specific ink left over. And there's a 90-minute seminar just on the creation of that ink all by itself. The powder pigments in the top right corner there, mixed with egg yolk. There's beautiful video footage of Donald Jackson taking carefully an egg yolk, taking it, separating it from the whites, and splitting it and dropping the insides into the ink that he's already created into one color, and when that yolk mixes with it, it just explodes. I mean, it's a fascinating process. And to be able to witness it and see the time and the intention that it takes through these ancient techniques doesn't make any sense to our modern minds, because we want to do it faster, we want to do it easier, we want to do it perfect. But that's not what we need. And again, I think the monks knew that. The process itself was a gift. The reading of it itself is a gift. This idea of margin. Even the margins on these pages, if you look at a page with just nothing but text block, you'll be aware of just how much white space there is on the page. Margin. Can you imagine how different this would be if they'd run it all the way to the top of every page and all the way to the bottom and right off the edge? It'd be a totally different experience. Probably look a little bit more like your life. Those times when we have no margin. I noticed driving over to Lincoln yesterday from Omaha, something I've seen 1,000 times. Just struck me yesterday. There's really only 2 kinds of drivers in the world. There's right lane drivers and there's left lane drivers. Are we communicating? Right? In that right lane, the people that follow the law, they're going the speed limit, they drive people like me nuts, so we get over to the left lane, right? And those left lane people, no concern, regard for the speed limit, usually tailgating somebody on their way to some big hurry. Dangerous, it's not enjoyable, and in the end, I've also observed that it's really not that much faster. The difference between margin and no margin in our life. When you're in that big hurry, you're always pushing up against something, no margin. All of this is an invitation to create more margin in our lives. And to understand it is to experience it. The St. John's Bible gives us that opportunity every time we open its pages. And remember what Rowan Williams said, patient and prayerful reading. The final experience is that of grace. Personally, I believe that giving and receiving forgiveness, giving and receiving grace from one another and from God is one of the biggest leaps of faith we can make in our life. Never are we more like God when we give and receive forgiveness and grace. To deeply believe, to err as human, reminds us that we all need some grace along the way. Again, the St. John's Bible stands as both a message and a model for grace. Remember, they're using vellum, right? They're using this ancient ink. They're using quills, and they're putting it on a page. And by the way, every page has been laid out with a computer program that showed exactly where this scribe had to stop on this page so that the next scribe could pick up on this page, right? So there was no room for error. So what were they going to do when that first error came along? Well, they went to Donald and said, oops. You know, because a scribe just copies. A scribe doesn't create. A scribe just copies, and they're human. And the first time that one of them missed a line but got all the way to the bottom of the page before they realized that they left out a line, yeah, I just saw a couple of you go. They went to Donald. He said, no big deal. We'll do what they used to do. We'll write the line at the bottom. We'll find some fun way to show them where it goes. The bottom right corner of your cover is just one of 9 examples in the St. John's Bible where a mistake was made. This happens to be the one in Mark's Gospel. But the very first one that was made, Genesis chapter 1. Right out of the gate, they made a mistake, and right out of the gate, they collectively said, you know what? We're human. We're not going to try to erase this. You know, by the way, they could have scraped that vellum. They could have. It would have made a mess and it would have compromised the quality of that vellum long term. They could have tried to hide it, but instead they just said, you know what? Let's just have some fun with it. So in those 9 mistakes, 4 of them are treated with these little birds that show you where the line was supposed to be. There are 2 bumblebees that are kind of pulling on this little pulley system that show you where the line was supposed to go to. And everybody's favorite, David, Hannah, you know the favorite one? The little lemur. There's a little monkey. I think it's in Chronicles. It shows you where the mistake was supposed to go. The whole point is this. Don't hide from your mistakes. Just embrace them. Just live them. Love them. Make something of them. I mean, that's an experience I think we all need. By the way, very, very late in the process, they were presenting some of these original manuscript pages to school-age children. And at one of these lunchtime presentations, this little girl, like young girl, pointed at the illumination that they had up there in front of them on a big screen so they could see the particulars. And she said, there's a mistake. And the presenter was like, no way, no way. This thing's been through the Committee on Illumination and Text. It's been through the scriptorium. It's been through the artists. They've all looked at it 100 times, up ways, down ways, sideways. They're like, no way. And she's like, yeah, huh? Sure enough, right there in one of the illuminations, boldface, the word across was misspelled. And again, they decided to just leave it. We'll see if others are discovered over the years. I kind of hope there are. Because every time we learn from our own mistakes, the world's a better place. We can experience grace and understand it differently as a result. Well, I'm going to wrap up now, and I wanted to have had some time to spend with this illumination with all of you. This is the frontispiece of Psalms. Frontispiece is just a fancy word for the first page of a book. There's lots of fancy words around this project, but they all point to pretty simple things. This is a simply profound piece of art. And by illumination, I should be clear, an illumination is not an illustration. An illumination is a meditation on Scripture that takes expression in art that always includes gold, silver, or platinum in the art. That doesn't mean much to us because we have screens and we have lights and electricity. But in a world lit only by fire in medieval times, you get a priest turning a page on a great big illuminated Bible like this, and the people see the words dancing in the light with the gold, the turning of the page. That's an illumination. In the Psalms frontispiece, there's countless messages and lessons to be learned in this, and I've of the strong belief that I would never tell you what you should see in here. I would just ask you, what do you see? What do you see in this? By the way, I have this illumination from a loose leaf folio of the Heritage Edition on a frame in the narthex. So on your way to the chapel, you can see a fully illuminated version of this with the gold foiling. But of all the different things you'll see here, you'll see it tied into the creation illumination with the little gold squares that are used as building blocks in the creation illumination, which you can see afterwards. You can see the shape of what looks like a candelabra almost, right? What religious tradition uses a candelabra? The Jewish faith, right? With the menorah. Well, the menorah later on is the opening page of Matthew's gospel. It's another one that you must see. Matthew's menorah was the way that the artist decided to depict the opening words of Matthew's gospel. Anybody remember what the riveting opening words of Matthew's gospel are? It's the genealogy of Jesus. It's a real snoozer. It's like 2 pages of names of who begat who and on and on and on. The artist found a way to even make that a masterpiece. It's a menorah that depicts the family tree of Jesus. That's amazing. But back to the Psalms, this has echoes of creation illumination, of Matthew's menorah illumination. But I think most importantly, what I would point out to you just as one point of reflection for you, and then I'll be done. They didn't know what to do with Psalms because they didn't want to use just blatantly illustrative images like they did in other places, trees and bugs and buildings and things like that. They wanted to create something more akin to music, which is very difficult to define. Music, which it said is to sing, is to pray twice, right? Well, what they did is they decided to record the monks of St. John's Abbey singing Gregorian chant. And then they made a digital voice print of the monks singing that chant and impressed it in gold from the very beginning of Psalms, which, as we all know, is a songbook, from the very beginning to the end. Now, that's fascinating in and of itself in all kinds of ways, not the least of which is 1,000 years from now, somebody could pull that voice print up, and through whatever technology they have then, they could play back the monks of St. John's Abbey in the year 2005 singing Gregorian chant. But more importantly, the universality of music is impressed upon the page when, as you realize, there are vertical strands also. You only see a few of them on this first page, but there are vertical strands of digital voice prints, of sound waves from other traditions that all intersect with the voices of the monks, saying we're all in this together. We are all connected in powerful and profound ways, not just through music, but through all forms of faith. They recorded and digitized a Native American sacred song from the Dakotas. They recorded and digital voice printed a Jewish men's choir singing psalms. They recorded a Buddhist tantric harmonics, an Islamic call to prayer, a Taoist temple music, Hindu bhajan, and an Indie Sufi chant, and wound it all through the Psalms. Time and again, there'll be messages that can bless our lives in something that's been so thoughtfully and so painstakingly created as the St. John's Bible. But above all, it's something that has to be experienced. Because we all, in an honest moment, will confess, when it comes to Scripture, we hear it, and we often just forget it. What was it this last Sunday right here in the pulpit of First-Plymouth Church? Sometimes we forget it. We see it, it helps us remember it, because we're all visual at some level. But when we experience it, we understand it. And that will be my hope for you and for me from this day forward. Thank you.
You have heard the story of the St. John Bible, beautifully rendered by Dr. Ross. Magnificence created by monks in Minnesota. That's fun to say. But now I think it's up to each one of us to engage in the same process. You see, the monks didn't create the Bible. The Bible has been given to all of us. It's a great story. But they made it as beautiful as possible. We must do the same. We've been given, each one of us, these great stories, the great strivings, the great hope of the Bible. Now you must illuminate it in your conscience. You must create it in the vellum of your values. You must make it beautiful. You see, too often in our world, people are making the Bible ugly. Too often. Too often the Bible becomes brutish in their hands, to put others down, to subjugate or discriminate, where the Bible is used with authoritarian moves to impose doctrine. It becomes something brunt and brutish. You must make the Bible beautiful. It is the story of our striving to be in right relationship with God, to be in right relationship with each other. And so in the calligraphy of your spirit, carry its love forth. Now, my friends, one way that we're trying to make the Bible beautiful here is in our effort to relieve and forgive the medical debt that saddles so many homes in this town. Anything that is put in the plate this evening, anything, goes directly to families and individuals in this town who are saddled by debt. Anything you put in the plate. Let's keep making the Bible beautiful. Please know that after the choir recesses, the docents take the scripture. You can, if you like, meet Dr. Ross in the chapel. It is good to be with you this evening.